Alright everyone, we have to start off today talking about Soleimani being assassinated again, various U.S. strikes involved, and the political response over here from various people. First and foremost, pointing out this. I'm against the concept of war with Iran, and my main point, especially yesterday, was why are we even in the region to begin with? The strike, well, I don't have a huge problem with the strike itself, it's just it never should have needed to occur because we shouldn't be involved in the Middle East. The proper solution to the problems in the Middle East is to not involve ourselves with it largely. We're capable of getting along with and propping up regimes that we're friendly with without being on the ground in the first place. The idea that we've brought some sort of special, unique stability to Iraq appears to be largely a lie because even their special security forces faced with a group of protesters abandoned the battlefield. That's not stability. If anything, we make ourselves look bad by bothering to maintain such a regime. It would almost be better for them to collapse. What I would say is this. I do not expect Trump to go to war with Iran. He has said over and over, and immediately in the wake of these strikes as well, that he didn't foresee that as something he wanted as a possibility. He's been fairly consistent in his foreign policy. It's funny because what happens is that when somebody gets uppity, people die or a building gets, burned to the ground, and then things go back to calm. And each time this happens, the same group of people who by and large like Trump, I think, people who are lean libertarian or even parts of the new right, chastise Trump, which is the proper thing to do, but they get a little bit emotionally invested. And then people on the left use it as quick fodder, but then they smack themselves in the head later because they realize that there was never any war. I think that what happened here is that Trump's response is more of a show of force of U.S. intel. That is that the reason for this is basically, hey, we knew where this dude was. You thought you were being, all coy about it. You thought he was hidden very well and could transit across Iraq with no problems. You chose to insult us and foment, an attack on our embassy, which, again, this is the claim by the government that Iran is behind it. I'm not going to assume that what the government tells me is correct, but it doesn't really matter. So we decided to take out, one of your top assets within the entire region. Fuck off. Leave us alone. It can be effective. Iran's immediate response was a letter to the UN Security Council or something. And the UN can't do anything. What are they going to do? We have a veto. In the UN, the United States, the major players in the UN don't face any repercussions from the UN. There's no real purpose to the UN actually existing because the states that you would seek to constrain ignore it at a whim on a regular basis. Not just the US. China ignores the UN. Israel ignores the UN. The French ignore the UN. Nobody listens to the UN. Rwanda ignores the UN. They face no repercussions. Here's why I don't think war is likely, though. Iran, by and large, does not have the capacity within the region to stand toe-to-toe with the U.S. or even U.S.-backed assets in a general warfare scenario. I don't think that this will cause anything other than some retaliatory strikes. Iran will activate a few sleeper cells in the Middle East, butcher a few people, but is that not par for the course for the Middle East? Acting like it's a major escalation of tensions within the Middle East undermines the very observation of recent history there, since the 9/11 period at least. Things have been dicey all over the Middle East, technically speaking, since we began world policing there in the 1950s. And the Soviets were right hot on our heels after kicking out, ironically enough, the governing Iranian body at the time in the early 50s. The Soviets were right on board going into the area to garner influence, saying, hey, Uncle Sam's going to kill you if you don't side with us, then rolling through Central Asia, actually, trying to go down through Afghanistan, which was basically the graveyard of nations for them. This is just an extension of the grand chessboard, by the way. The idea that the U.S. has some love for Saudi Arabia on a religious basis, or that the Russians have some civilizational unique relationship with Iran because of Persia, that's totally wrong. What it is that Russia specifically and the Eastern Bloc in general, that the post-Eastern Bloc dissolution states, especially China now as their bankroller, and the Western Alliance, the U.S. and its allies in Western Europe and elsewhere, are constantly fighting over energy resources. The problem is this. By and large, when the United States is running the shipping lanes, and it's really naval, ultimately, is what we're talking about here. things generally go well because for the most part the U.S. keeps the lanes open, and even people that we don't really get along with, they do normal shipping. The problem is that whenever China or whenever of these states get involved with international waters, the first thing they try to do is choke things off. Look at China with the so-called South China Sea, with the Spratly Islands. One of the first things that they do post-reinforcing locations is tell the U.S. Navy they're not allowed in international waters. Well, of course, we ignored that, but that was the first thing that was attempted. It becomes a problem. Now, you can argue, well, that's because the U.S. is the pawn of the globalists. Okay, at least in terms of global trade, that's generally a good thing. Because that's why you don't have spiraling shortages in both the first and third world of various goods and services. Say what you will about globalization in a general sense, the trade side of it has always been a thing anyway. One of the basic problems with economies around the world and one of the biggest causers of diplomatic tensions has been piracy, among other things. The U.S. is now the greatest force against them as well. So I don't support war with Iran. Thankfully, I don't think it's likely. Trump has been relatively even-handed. It's very funny to see like Bernie Sanders go off a cliff right now saying, oh, we need to draft a bill to stop war with Iran. We need to stop Trump from using the powers that we gave the executive branch in the first place back in the fucking Bush era. Bernie Sanders and all these others enabled the executive branch to conduct unilateral strikes and basically do whatever the hell they wanted. Now it's a problem. Orange man bad, so now it's an issue. Oh, I support Congress fully in rescinding those powers to make it so that, hey, if we're going to conduct any military exercises against another country, I want to know where every person in the House and the Senate stands so I know who to campaign against. So I know who we should kick out, namely the people that fomented war. I think that's a lovely idea, Mr. Sanders. It's great that you finally realize that belatedly after, almost 2 fucking decades. That's wonderful. But seeing the Democrats try to campaign on being anti-war while at the same time being blatantly not anti-war. Sanders 2015, there was an article there was like, well, I would do what Obama's doing. I would use drones instead of open warfare. That's still war. How is it any different? Can I ask the Democrats a question? Because they don't seem to have a problem with individual drone strikes. How is it more of an act of war to take out Soleimani with a drone strike or a missile or whatever the hell we did? It's hypersonic missiles. How is that more of an act of war, all things considered, than splattering any random group of militants out in the desert that you never heard about from NPR or Bloomberg? How is it any goddamn different? Oh, it's the top man in Iran. What's Iran as an organized state entity going to do? Is it going to declare war on the United States? No, it's not going to declare war on the United States. No, there could be definitely an escalation of tensions. Does this lead to a war? And I mean a real, genuine war, like something like shock and awe, like when we rolled into Iraq with 100,000 men. An actual war. I'm not talking about a couple of drone strikes. Those are regrettable. I stand against those too. They're a waste of money. They're a waste of time. We simply shouldn't be in the region. But how is this a different day than it was a few days ago? How is the situation there any less dicey than it already was? And by the way, I find this very funny. I'll say one thing here that really pisses me off even about some of my fellow libertarians. To point out that Soleimani is responsible for fighting ISIS and therefore you should give him a pass and say that he's an angel, that's not the way that things work. Sometimes it's just a lesser evil. Yeah, Soleimani and his forces, definitely preferable to ISIS. They don't chew people's hearts out of their chest for one thing, and they usually don't open slave markets in the open air in Libya, which, by the way, was the result of Democrat-led foreign policy that none of these people running for office right now had a problem with. But, other than Sanders, we'll give him a pass on that one, maybe. But, does that mean that there aren't still shenanigans going on? The idea that the Shia militants of the world are less prevalent in fucking around in Europe and the U.S. and therefore somehow are good as opposed to ISIS or Al-Qaeda or something? No, it's just less bad. Well, I mean, that's like saying, okay, well, the cyanide will kill you faster than this watered-down arsenic, so the arsenic is obviously good for you. No, it's not. I'm not going to take sides. I don't care about what Iran does. We shouldn't be antagonizing them, but who gives a fuck? Who cares? This region has been imploding with violence for thousands of years anyway. You expect it to stop because the U.S. puts a few thousand more men in? And likewise, would it stop if the U.S. simply withdrew? No, the violence will still be there, it just won't affect us as directly, which I think, by the way, is an improvement. Ultimately, Trump so far has given me no reason to distrust him on foreign policy. He has not done any of the things that Obama and Bush did. Appeasement of our enemies, arming of various groups that openly flaunt themselves and attack us. He hasn't invaded any country with significant forces. I understand he's sending several thousand additional assets to the Middle East. While I oppose this, it's a drop in the bucket to what's been done in the past, and it's really even less than a restoration of the troop levels that were there a couple of years ago anyway. Post-drawdown troop levels. I'm uncomfortable with it. If I were in charge, I would say, you know what, fuck this. I would leave a fucking a blaze of glory in my path, and then I would leave. I would punish them, and then I would leave. I would say, you attacked our embassy, I gotta smack you in the nose a little bit. I would burn their embassy to the ground or something like that, and then I'd leave, and I'd say, okay, we're even Stevens. Fuck off. We've left your crazy land, leave us alone. And if you do anything with regards to the shipping lanes, we'll sink your entire navy into the briny deep. And by the way, we have the ability to do that. Didn't Ronald Reagan liquidate almost half the Iranian navy at one point? Almost effortlessly, within a couple of days' time? Yeah, I'm really scared. I'm scared about this country or halfway around the world that so far does not have true long-range missile capabilities and might kind of sort of be developing the A-bomb. I'm not scared of them. Any more than I'm scared of North Korea. It's a boogeyman that's dragged out by the pro-war neocons for Raytheon and all of these other groups over here in the U.S. They want their stock to go up, so they rattle swords every year or two. This is sort of a perennial thing. Trump may be taking a page out of the playbook of Netanyahu on how to get reelected. I mean, here's the other thing. I'll say this really quickly in closing. When people say, well, Trump's going to start a war to get reelected, yeah, his numbers have been relatively decent, and impeachment has actually been a net positive for him. Arguably, the worst thing that he could do is start conflict, which is why I don't think he's crazy enough to do that. And if he is, of course, if he starts a war with Iran, I won't vote for him. So there you go. And neither, by the way, would a lot of the other people that supported him. Even if I like his tax policies, I would just stay home. I'm not going to vote for socialism, and I'm not going to vote for a person who's killing a bunch of people in Iran. It's just not going to happen. But let's just make that fucking clear. But right now, there's no war. Killing Soleimani, act of war? Yeah, maybe so. So are a million other drone strikes we conduct every fucking month. So every time that Obama did this, the Democrats should have condemned him, but they never did. Every time Bush did something like this, he should have been condemned, and nobody dared to. They didn't want to be called unpatriotic. Only in the Trump era has it been okay to question U.S. foreign policy all of a sudden. Not its intel agencies. By the way, when Trump says, here's an interesting mind game for the Democrats in closing. You say that the FBI and all these groups are beyond reproach. So when these groups tell Donald Trump or his advisors that Soleimani is inevitably going to attack U.S. assets, why is it that you don't trust him? He's just reporting what the intel agencies working with the military told him. The Pentagon told him these things. Well, then you're supposed to trust him, or you're a conspiracy theorist and probably a Russian sympathizer, right? So just fucking bite on that one. That's about all. Peace out.